Up, slut. You should hear me better. I still should be as good looking as ever. What's going on, Riser? Dude, have you started this fucking computer and it I don't know if it's gonna be. No, it's not. Oh yeah, it is. Hey, who knows? Dude, lazy as fuck. Dog, I'm going 24/7, 365 from the pandemic. That fucking bitch on that fucking island with that fucking crown couldn't even out. Dude, I'm the best. That bitch died. I'm telling you that stupid bitch of a queen died, and I'm still going. My audio sucks cock. Dude, I can make it. Yeah, I hear it. I hear it sucks cock. I hear it. It sucks cock. I get it. Let me clear my cache. And I fucking hate doing it. That's the horseshittiest of the bullshit. Hey, dude. Hey, dude. I know. I know. I know. Just wait. It's gonna be sicker than fuck. Oh, I know. Did you know when you were like, "Hey, your audio's down"? So here's what happens. Everybody tells me that my audio sucks. And I'm like, okay, well, what do you want me to do? Fuck. I know. I got it. Now shut the fuck up. I can hear myself in that one. That one will be fine. That one will be fine. Can you hear me here? Hey assholes. Hey assholes. He has me turned down there. He has me turned down there. He has me turned down there. Yo. 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 Yo, dog. Not yet, not yet, not yet, not yet. I'll have to figure this one out. Okay, so here we go. Yo, can you hear me? Yo, can you hear me? Okay, just one moment. Now can you hear me? Ian, can you hear me? I was just gonna say the same to you. Apologies for my connection issues. It's been an absolute pleasure to meet you. We're done. Michelle, pleasure to meet you. Happy birthday, big dog. Dude, I want to play. I logged out of my account and I have to create a new one. So, dude, can you hear me? Can you hear me? Would you like to play that music off? You got it. Just I advise you if you're ever gonna like quote unquote mute me on one of them, just put me down to 10% because you never know when one of the things might go down. Just put it down to 10%. I'll mute it. I'll do my best to mute it. But wow, that was fucking unbelievable. I can't believe I got my account right. It's crazy. Okay, here we go. On this one, well, not anything exciting, but I cleared my cache and shit. So let's. Does anyone else want to play? No. Not play that. It's this one. Like, okay, excellent. Let's wait for Kian. Oh, Jin. Jin or Chinese merchant. Do you want to play? All right. add me as a friend. I'm at the Rabbi. TheRabbi. Dude, you're gonna get so addicted. Jen, what's your name? I'm here. Well, then make them count, dude. Let me know when you're done. Riser, are you ready? All right. All right, check this out. Jen, what's your name on? What do I add? What's your friend name on Play-Doh? Okay. Okay, good. Hey, you got it, baby. You got it. That's perfect. Excellent. You're the man. Everyone's gonna love you. You're gonna be a nationwide sensation with these skills. I want everybody to know, whether you listen to me now in 2024 or in the future, that my man Jin is about to change his life. Why? Because Jin's a gamer and Jin is a hardcore competitor. And this motherfucker is about to lock horns with Caspian Sea and Riser and Rabbi to create one of the most fantastic foursomes in the history of mankind. What do y'all think of that? Riser, what do you think of that? We have to explain. Yo, dog. We talked Jin. Jin got it. So, Jin, what's your fucking make your screening in this game? If you can, make it the same thing that it's in Discord. Doug, did you download the right thing? It's Plato. Plato. It's like a blue dye. Yo, dog, I don't think mine's ever made a sound. Oh, maybe it made that. What is your ID? What is your ID? Oh man, you might be worse than this. You're a competitor, dog. How did your phone? How did your phone get locked? Dog, it's Play-Doh. It's a. Okay, that's not the end of the world. So here's what you want to do. You want to download an app called Play-Doh. I thought we were past this. You don't have to send me a screenshot of your shit. Download. Did you download Play-Doh? Plato. I don't think you downloaded the right thing. Did you? Doug, I've never had this game ever make a single sound. That's why I want to make sure you have the right game. It's never made a sound for me. All right, all right. So what? Okay, Doug. Doug, do you remember like 2 hours ago when I was like, hey, what's your Play-Doh username? That's when you should have told me. That's okay. I got you. No, you can take the mobile gamer out of the man, but you can never take the man out of the mobile game. You're gonna fucking be there. You're gonna be square. You're gonna know what's up. All I wanted is your username. No, just say it. It's words. What is it? I can't say it. What is it? That's cool. That's cool. FLOW. Oh, dude, it's fine. It's fine. FLOW. Dog, how about you just? How about you at me? I'm at the Rabbi. Low new. Low new Y62. It says friend invitation. It says FLOWNEW62. I'm sorry. FL. Oh, you got it? Okay, cool. And then I'm going to send you a game request or a game invitation. All right, here we go. We got it, boys. Oh, wait. Oh, you're not sure. Okay. Okay. Wow. Are you sure? John, are you sure? Come on. Come on. Come on. Play one round with us, please. Yeah. Yep. Just one moment. You're going to have the invitation. 3, 2, 1. Bingo. Dude. All right. So if you want to know how to do this, I saw this secret. If you bounce it like this, backwards, it, oh, but I didn't do it 100%. No, I only did it 98. So you have to do it 100. If you do it 98, that happens. Right. So let's explain to Jin. If you go in the black stuff, you have to start from the beginning. If you go in the water, you have to go from where you originally shot it. So the black stuff is tar. Oh, we have to explain how to shoot. So you pull back and. Oh, okay. Oh, dude, perfect. Dude, he's an expert. He's an expert. That was a 10 out of 10 move. 10 out of 10. Dog, you're in now. 10 out of 10 move. That was a 10 out of 10. I want everyone to know. All right, dog. 100%. If you hit it 100%, that's what happens. So, I think that's the secret. There you go. Giving him a little bit. Oh, what a good shot. Riser. 100% good shot. Jin, if you hit it against the wall at 100%, it will like roll perfectly onto the arrows. Not that way, Captain. Is it possible? Is it possible? I think that's the best we can do. That's cool. Oh, good shot. Now, I'll tell you exactly. Well, now I don't want to. Oh, no, no. Actually, that's one of the hard. That's uh, you fucked me. That's not cool, man. Dude, what a shit shot. Dog, I was disappointed in everything. And the behavior of players. No, wrong way. Too hard. Dude, that sucked. You fucked me. That was a difficult one. Jin, Jin, he's new. He's new. He's new. Jin, go. Oh, wait. No. Hey, too hard. There you go. Nice. Perfect. Dude, you got 2 points right there. He's on the board. In his second hole. All right. Here we go. Losers go that way. It's actually probably the you can get fucked like pretty bad. Like right now, Riser is in a bad. Caspian Sea, fuck him over, dude. Fuck him over. A bad shot. That wasn't a joke. That was just straight up. You were fucking serious. Jin, put the ball down. Scott, you have to put it down on the tee. On the little green, dark green. Jin, put the ball down on the dark green. Jin, put the ball in the dark green. Even worse. Who's worse? Right? That was a good shot. He was in here. Dude, we're at an all-time high with Peg on the wrong side of 10 minutes. Did you know this? Dude, what the hell happened to Jin? Really close at 22 cents. Jin, what the fuck? Hit the ball. Did anyone else hear him say that? No, I understand. You're fortunate that I understand, bitch, because that's how you were playing. Right, I understand. I understand. You were able to show how good you are at this game, and if we were all rated on a scale from 0 to 10, with 0 being not very good and 10 being as good as we are, you would end up somewhere around a little bit. That's true. You have 2 points. I agree. Just take your fucking shots, go do your thing. What the fuck was that? Do you think it's possible to make a hole in one here? Well, then do it. It is. Off that back tree. Off that back. Somebody would have to knock that ball out of the Ooh, that was a pretty good shot. Look at this sexy shot. Not, dude, that's horseshit. That's horseshit. Somebody else needs to take their shot. Water. What a great shot. Water bump him. Riser. He's a perfect position to water bump. Water bump him. Nope, that's not the shot, dog. That's a terrible shot. Dude, what the fuck's doing? Holding hands over there? Water bump is. No way. Dude, I was going to say you could bounce it off the tree, maybe. Dude, I'm making the best shot you've ever seen right here. Right off of Caspian Sea into the hole. Off of Caspian Sea into the hole. Big loss. Amazing shot. I think that's the best shot we basically could do. That was fucking phenomenal. Dude, we were just wondering where your ass was. Are you ready? We're playing, dog. Literally, within the last 10 minutes. We thought, well, dude, how are you enjoying Harry Potter Obama Sonic Camino? It's doing really well. That'll work. That's the one that Ducky's in. Dude, I streamed my life in that coin for like a month until Ducky asked me not to. Here's the hilarious thing: she didn't know anything about cryptocurrency. She's like doing pretty well. This hot crypto girl we know. Yeah. And their telegram. Dude, Caspian Sea. Yeah. Yeah. Telegram, dude. That. Well, that's a thought. Dude, we literally gave you the whole fucking thing. We were like, Caspian Sea, we're not gonna mess with you at all. We're gonna dick around. What do you I thought you were gonna say 10 minutes. Waiting for players. Yo, did you not get an invitation? Go, big dog. Oh, that's the perfect shot. That is fucking. Don't that even. That gnome should even come into play. I have a question. Well, it's like I'm trying to think how to phrase it. Do you think it's worse to start in pink and then go on grass, or to go on grass and then go into pink? Like, does it matter? That's what I expect out of you. That's a good question. I don't know. Because my ball went in before yours? Oh, dude, that was a good shot. That was really good. Terrible shot. Oh, wow. I'm going to try to fuck you both if I get right in front of you. Like the only shot. Mm, I think it did. Purple can definitely fuck you. Now it fucked you. Yellow. That's true. Yellow is amazing. Riser. What an amazing shot. He's going to hit me. That was a veteran shot. Absolutely. No, how did I miss that shot? I'm not good at judging the pink stuff. I'm just good at eating it. Hey, Riser, that was an amazing shot. Dude, what was it? This shot sucks, Riser. Let me go. Let me go. I'm going to do a good one. I'm going to do one of the best ones ever. That shot sucks. That shot sucks. It's 69, boys. I didn't even know there were percentages. I'm gonna need a caddy. I'm gonna need a caddy in like different distances. Blast it, big dog. Why would you do that? I thought you could get it. You should have gone for it. Tree bank. Tree bank. What a beautiful shot. Bravo. Dude, that was beautiful. Testing two. What in the fuck are we waiting on? Get this fucking ball. Pretty good. Dude, that's pretty good. Dog, you guys. Wow. I didn't even hit the thing the way that you're supposed to hit it. I hit the ball. Terrible shot. Hit the ball. Pass me and see. Bump it off the pinwheel. Off the pinwheel. Yeah, probably. That's a big putt for us. For us. You're gonna hit it. Oh, that missed me. I don't know what to do. I didn't help him at all. Hit my ball. Hit my ball. Hit my ball, G. Oh, no way. You're right. Oh, what a great shot. In his way. No, you can't. No, you can't. No way. You're fucked. Nope. Nope. You're fucked. You are fucked. I mean, fuck, dude. What the fuck is that? I you can tell I think basically different. Both go in the water. Water. Water bumping. Why would you do that? Why would you water bumping? Water bumping. What about them? No, I know. Yep. How about you just make the fucking putt? Look at you three tied. I love this movie. Anything with the black dog. This is a terrible shot. This is a terrible shot. I don't know why the fuck you would do that. That's a shot for like doofuses. Riser at least has a head. Black. I could just already say this is black. You do better. Okay, then I will, baby. Shit. Make it. Put his ass in that fucking dark shit right now. Dog, they're going after you. You're the perfect little block. Riser, hit him. What are you fucking doing? Dude, do you want a fucking T-square? Go. Get him. Get him. Oh, that's a good shot. Why does it take people so long? SBC, what the fuck are you doing? Yeah, go. Riser, what are you doing? Oh, what a terrible shot. Caspian C, go. I'm sick of telling you guys when you have to go. Go. There you go. I don't care if you're going to the fucking black. Go. Zoo, he can if you hit my. No. Zoo, I'll help you. Oh, you fucked up. Zoo could have not. Zoo could have helped himself, but Zoo chose the dark side. You could have pushed my ball over and I could have bumped his ball down. Dude, SBT, are you playing? No, the answer is no. I love this horse. Horseshit. Caspian C, we're going to play again. Do you want to be included? Are you going to pay attention? I asked Caspian C a question. Caspian C, are you ready? Are you going to pay attention or not? Dude, we're going with three. We're going with three. If I have to tell you one time during this game, we're done. As friends, it's over. You're getting the ban. I'm going to salt your land. It's over. Don't waste time. Oh, keep answering it, guys. Whose shot is it? Two. Two. I don't care if you hit the ball like that. Just go. That's great. Good job, Duke. That is quick. That's what we like. Riser knows what's up. Dude, no one will hit it over there unless we are glitching. Wow, Captain he was ready and he put together a beautiful shot. Now, here's how it's done. Show us. That's how it's done. Dog, you're supposed to advance the ball. You didn't know that? Now that's a good shot. Now that's a good shot. Ooh, Caspian C. He did a good job too. Dude, no, terrible. Duke has progressed 6 feet on the field. Yellow, knock it all the way through. Glass, all that shit. Hell, yeah. You're amazing. This one reminds me of Mickey Mouse. Do you see how this one looks like Mickey Mouse?
Yeah.
There you go.
It's cool.
Right, so that was a good shot.
Okay. Well, I scored 0 like that. The good news is you put something this one. Yeah.
I don't disagree with them. It's better to go from the top. Because that fucking thing's in the way. I agree. What up, pimp? How you living? What's good? Weird dog, but I'm doing my best to stay cool 24/7, baby. 89, 95. Yeah. What kind of smoothie do you make? We're playing the game right. Yeah. If you want to play it, what a great shot. Riser. That was amazing. Dude, we all tied.
This is the worst.
Worship.
Rabbi.
I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to talk about it.
Do you remember Listen,
That has been seeded in a different shot. Definitely. Is this waterbound, boys? No one ever goes in for here. This is a terrible shot. Oh, that sucks. I'll take it though. There's a way to take that shot.
this shot. Everyone was trying to do is this shot.
We kind of made it different. Yeah, any shot.
The shot.
Yeah.
That's the big identical shot. This is the shot. We meant to do.
Somebody get my ball. I do a dead shot, gentlemen. Are you guys gonna even score? Are you guys gonna even score? Are you just gonna give me all the points?
Yeah.
Looks like it. All the points to Rabbi. Right here. All the points to Rabbi. There you go. Oh, so he figured it out. He figured it out. You hit it slow. He has to hit it. You have to hit it slow. No. Hit it at like, I don't know, 70 instead of 100 into the wall. No, it's not. Yeah. Oh. No, you never do. Oh man, that is bad. Dude, it hit the crack in a bad spot. Dude, I get to see it.
So, so I think you did something good about this. Did this. Something like that.
What the fuck was that? Well, I love this guy. That was under. That's how some guys can see. I love this part. I love this part where it's like, oh, I could go in. I can't believe I gave the win away. That was good. Water bump at zoo. Water bump at zoo. There you go.
I'm in a good position.
Give me next shot.
Yeah, next round. But Rodgers doesn't get
What's up, Possum Tits? How you doing, girl? Boy, we miss you. Hey, I have a Discord. Did you know that? Oh, I need to send it to you. Just one moment. I am in the middle of a major game. We got a bunch of people in here. Possum Tits, how do you like this all-time high that we're approaching? How do you like this all-time high that we're approaching? Excellent. Okay, I'm going to send you the invite in just a moment. I hope you're lovely. How's life been? How has your life been? Excellent.
pretty good.
Okay, do you have Possum Tits? Do you have Discord? Excellent. Okay, so I am sending you an invitation, and come join and say hi to the people we have in there. They're from here, Caravan South Kenya as well. Excellent. We'll see you in there. I love this store. Excellent. We'll see you then. Shout out to Possum Tits, one of the most amazing people within here, Caravan South Kenya. No, just now that's a good shot. No. Dude, what are you gonna do? Dude, get him. Dude, get him. What are you doing, dude? Riser, get rid of this boy. It's relatively easy. Oh, Caspian Sea, that was a good shot. Boy, that was good. What did you do? What are you fuckers doing? It's like this, son. What a perfect shot. What a perfect fucking shot. What a perfect shot. Do it. Oh, that's a huge miss. This is going to be short, and it's going to come all the way down. Zoo, guaranteed. Guaranteed. Shoot the shot, Zoo. It's short. No matter what he does, it's going to be short. It's short. Zoo. Oh, he's going to try to stop. Stop. They would have been very hard.
In a good position. Bad news is Rabbi.
He's playing. Caspian C has no chance to catch me. Come get me, Caspian C. No, he can't. He's not going to win it. That's why I know. I'm in control. He's getting no points. You're really going to hurt Caspian C. Hurt Caspian C. Champion. I'm the champion, baby. Let's see your shot. No one. It's over. You're done, son. You're all done. I'm celebrating from the pit. I'm celebrating from the pit, baby. Impossible. Rabbi won. Hey, Duke got his 100th win. Or, I mean, Rising. Congratulations. What a great shot. Dude. Okay, so someone hit my ball just slightly. No, not like that. Not like that, Riser. Riser, what a great shot. What a great shot. Welcome. How are you? shot that I should have missed. Good shot. No, it's not. It's Caspian Sea gonna shoot it? Not saying he wasn't doing it quickly. I'm saying it's his turn. Is that who we were supposed to see? Oh, you're saying you're gonna have the best shot in the world? Let's see it. This is terrible. This is terrible. Awful shot. This is an awful shot. Land, baby. Land. Water. Water. West Side gangster. Water. Caspian Sea is a very good shot. No. That's not what I would do. Make it Zoot. Zoot's gonna make it. Zoot's gonna make it. Look at it. It's like a weird angle. Riser should give even points on. Oh no way. Riser should even points on the board. I think it was. I think it was. Riser leaving points on the board again. He's just trying to what a beautiful shot. As you can see, do that. Do what he did. No, harder. Harder, you gotta make it. Oh, he did. What a beautiful shot. Both of you. That was the hardest 1 point I've seen. I hate this one. Yeah, he does it perfectly. I'm gonna water pump. Oh, what a beautiful shot. No way. What a good shot. Water pump it. shot. It's definitely a difficult shot. And Rabbi, somehow, some way, gone. Oh, oh, he can make it. He can make it. I always say that. I always say that. I see how. That's how you do it. He did it. He did it. That's exactly right, man. So somebody can. Ready, boys? That's the west side. That's how the west side plays. What a great fucking shot. Why do you think all this weird stuff? Are you Jew? Christianity? I love wage slavery. Yep. Oh, it's called Rabbi's Whooping Your Ass. It's new from Tokyo. Dude, she'll be here. Oh, dude, do you know Constantine? Yeah, you should. FBC. Riser. Don't make this putt for him. Nice putt. Dude, here we go, boys. You ready for me to make it right? Just right off the bat. Oh, yeah, super. Riser. 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 Dude, somebody got this ball in. No idea. Perfect. Zoo, hit their balls on. Zoo, make it.
In the short.
Well, riser could tie. Riser could tie. Just make it, dude. Dude, all I need is 1 point. And I probably won't get it. That was perfect. Even still. Do it. Perfect. Exactly what I wanted to do. Exactly. This gave me the win. Thank you, Zoo. Yes! Nope. I get the win, the goal, all by my fucking self. It's been fun, friends.
Decades of exploration. Finally, in the 1490s, they make it around the southern Cape of Africa and into the Indian Ocean. And by the mid-90s, managed to get to the west coast of India. That results in the Portuguese having now direct access to the trading systems of Asia, of the Indian Ocean, Southeast Asia, and beyond. What they found, however, was that they could not simply arrive on the scene and take over. They weren't strong enough, they weren't powerful enough to assert dominance over the existing trading system. In 1511, they attacked and seized the port of Malacca, which is down on the Malay Peninsula, one of the key trading centers in Southeast Asia. They hoped that this perhaps would put them into a dominant position. But again, they found that even control of this very crucial entrepot was not sufficient to give them the kind of control that they hoped for. They seem to have thought, in perhaps a somewhat arrogant way, that simply arriving on the scene would be sufficient for them to assert the superiority of themselves, of the West, of Christian civilization over the Asians. But that proved not to be the case. Instead, what they realized eventually, certainly as we move on into the 16th century, was that there was tremendous wealth to be made, not by taking over and dominating the spice trade from Southeast Asia all the way back to Europe, but by participating in the local trading networks of the Indian Ocean, of Southeast Asia, and of East Asia, what comes to be called the country trade. And within these local trading networks, they began to carry cargoes, to establish a presence in ports all over the region, and to do most of their economic activity within the local context, going back to Europe only occasionally, and even then making most of their money not from the transportation of goods over these very, very long distances, but from the shorter trading excursions that they made within Asia. The Spanish followed suit. The Dutch and the English, beginning around 1600, also established trading companies to manage their affairs in Asia and became part of this same process, not of establishing dominance, but of becoming participants in a trading network, a trading system, which was so expensive and so lucrative and so wealthy that there was enough for all of them to find profitable roles within it. Through the 17th and into the 18th centuries, Europeans established a place for themselves within the existing Asian trading networks. But they remained merely one group out of many participants in this larger system. Rivalries between the European powers further weakened their positions in Asia. The Spanish and the Portuguese, the English and the Dutch, the Northern Europeans versus the Southern Europeans, the Protestants versus the Catholics, a variety of divisions and rivalries served to undermine whatever coherence they might have had. There was not a single European presence, but rather each of them acted on their own and often in conflict with one another. So that perhaps further prevented them from achieving any kind of true domination. The Dutch eventually came to focus their economic activity on the islands of Southeast Asia, what is today the country of Indonesia, and in Japan. The Dutch were able, indeed, when Japan sought to close itself off, to restrict trade with outsiders, trade with foreigners. The Dutch managed to be the only foreigners, the only Westerners, who were allowed to trade regularly. Twice a year, they could send ships to Nagasaki, but all other Western traders were banned from Japan. The Spanish, of course, established their position in the Philippines, and after 1571, when they took over Manila, that became a very, very lucrative center of trade for them. We've talked already about the role of Manila as the western terminus of what are called the Manila galleons, the great ships that sailed from Acapulco in Mexico across the Pacific, bringing silver from the Spanish mines in Mexico and Latin America, and Chinese traders who came from the Southeast China coast over to Manila absorbed much of this silver and transported it back to China to pay for all the commodities, all the various goods that were sold to the Spanish. The Spanish would then transport these things back across the Pacific to Mexico. Some of them stayed there. Some of them eventually made their way across the Atlantic back to Europe. The Portuguese, who had been the first to seek out a presence in Southeast Asia, maintained some role there. They had trading positions on the west coast of India, and of course, in the 1530s, established a small enclave at Macau on the south coast of China, which remained in Portuguese hands until 1999. But they devoted much of their attention to Africa and to Brazil, and so did not become as significant a factor in the European presence in East Asia as they might have been. While the Dutch and the Spanish and the Portuguese were interested in their various particular localities, the British, of course, became very much involved in India. All the Western powers continued to see China as the greatest prize of all, but one which it was very difficult for them to gain access to. They saw it as a tremendous potential market, a place where they could sell goods to a vast number of potential consumers, and of course, more realistically, perhaps, they saw it as the source of high quality manufactured goods. These were what were in great demand back in Europe and in other places. The ceramics, the tea, the lacquerware, other kinds of silks, textiles that were higher in quality and better in price than what was available in Europe. At the end of the 18th century, we get back to our threshold. We've talked about the situation in China and some of the problems that were beginning to emerge there towards the end of the reign of the Qianlong Emperor. But in Europe at this time, in the West at this time, things were also moving through a period of great change. And it's really two principal areas that I want to look at with regard to this. The first should be familiar to most of us already, is the Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution, which takes place certainly first and foremost in Britain, creates new conditions for the production of goods. The conditions that led to the Industrial Revolution, the technological circumstances, the economic factors, the nature of commodity production, the kind of market economy that the Industrial Revolution grows out of. Many of these factors were also present in China, certainly in the Jiangnan area, the very wealthiest and most commercialized part of China. To a certain extent, also in parts of India, particularly in the Bengal region of India, where rather similar economic developments have been taking place. Nonetheless, it is in England that we see the Industrial Revolution actually taking place. There's a lot of debate about this, a lot of discussion about how this came to pass. Certainly part of it was the proximity that British early industrial manufacturers had to sources of energy, in particular coal, the existence of easily accessible coal reserves in close geographic proximity to centers of industrial activity meant that factories could grow and function more economically than in places where coal supplies and textile production, for example, were separated by long distances, which was certainly the case in China. The English also were very good at appropriating technologies, at seeing how an existing technology functioning on the basis of human labor power could be adapted to the use of steam power, of energy produced using coal. And in particular, they were able to adapt the textile weaving technology that they found in Bengal as they began to establish a greater presence in India. And by combining some of these large-scale loom technologies from India with steam power produced in England, we're able to dramatically transform textile production and launch really the sort of cutting-edge industry of the Industrial Revolution. Well, the material aspect of the Industrial Revolution is one dimension. The expansion of the capacity to produce goods, the reduction in the costs of production that mechanization and large-scale manufacture yielded. Changes in the technology, not just of producing goods, but of distributing them. Changes in transportation technology, the building of railroads in the 19th century, different kinds of power, technological innovations in shipbuilding and in the powering of ships, leading to faster transport in maritime communication, other kinds of technological innovations associated with the Industrial Revolution, some of which didn't really get put in place until later on in the 19th century. But all as a package, this material dimension of the Industrial Revolution creates a whole new platform for the production of wealth and the dissemination of those products into a global market. It changes the role that Europe had within the larger global system from one of essentially consuming manufactured goods produced elsewhere to producing cheap manufactured goods, which they then needed to market elsewhere. In conjunction with this material dimension, though, and certainly playing a very, very powerful role in this overall process, is the rise of a new ideology in the West. And this is the ideas that we associate perhaps most classically with the work of Adam Smith. It was in 1776 that he published his book, The Wealth of Nations. And in that, Smith argues that governments should basically refrain from intervention in the economy as much as possible and allow markets to function freely. Now, this was quite a transformation, quite a change. The dominant mode of economic activity, if you will, certainly in terms of large-scale international activities, had been what's called mercantilism. Mercantilism was essentially state-sponsored capitalism. If we look particularly at the question of the relationship between Europe and Asia, we can see a couple of classic mercantilist enterprises in the Dutch and English East India companies. These were royally chartered companies formed within just a couple of years of each other, around 1600 to 1603. And they had managed the trade between either Holland or England and the Far East. The English East India Company had come to concentrate its activities more and more in India, while the Dutch East India Company had concentrated its activities more and more in the islands of Southeast Asia. But they were very comparable in terms of their sort of organization and their animating principle. For Adam Smith, this was not the way to go. This was not the most effective way to promote trade and commerce. Now, of course, writing in 1776, the Industrial Revolution was barely getting underway. He was not really talking about the kind of industrial capitalist enterprise which becomes characteristic of the 19th century. And yet, the ideas of free trade which Smith enunciates really become most effective when they are placed in conjunction with the growth in the material capacity for production that the Industrial Revolution brings about. And so, at the beginning of the 19th century, what we find in the West, and most particularly in England, is a very potent combination of a developing industrial economy capable of producing goods in large quantities at relatively low prices, needing access both to raw materials and to markets for those manufactured goods, and possessing in conjunction with that capacity an ideology of free trade, which argues that markets everywhere should be open to everyone, and that the British, as international traders, should be able to go where they wish and deal with whomever they wish on terms basically of equality and open access. It's a very, very powerful ideology that challenges the existing dominance of the great trading companies and suggests that if the state is involved at all, it should be involved solely to the degree of creating those conditions which allow private economic interests to maximize themselves. Well, the British were trading with China already, but they wanted to trade more. They wanted to trade more with everyone. At the end of the 18th century, and as they moved into the beginning of the 19th century, they were looking for a way to break in, if you will, to the Chinese market. They had been buying things from China for a long time. And this was the basic economic relationship between China and the West for centuries, that the Chinese had things, the Westerners came and bought them, and they bought them using silver. Silver flowed into China steadily over the centuries from the 16th century down to the end of the 18th century, beginning of the 19th century. The British needed some way to change that, to break that established pattern, to overcome that existing relationship. At the beginning of the 19th century, they found a way to do so And we'll see how that story unfolds in the next lecture. We come now really to the great turning point in modern Chinese history and in some ways in world history that the beginning of the 19th century represents. From this point until really very recent times now, the story of Chinese history that we've been following goes on to a rather negative decline, a rather negative trajectory. Problems arise, have been building up both within China and coming to China from outside. And it is at the beginning of the 19th century that we really begin to see these manifest themselves in much more serious ways. The end of the reign of the Qianlong Emperor in the mid-1790s is a good marker. It's a convenient historically sort of line of delineation, demarcation, where we can see that the very successes that the dynasty had achieved have begun to bear negative fruits. Population growth, which was, of course, a sign of the prosperity and the stability and the peace of the Qing Empire, which had been quite rapid, brought up to about 400 million people by the beginning of the 19th century, has started to push against available resources. The food supply, the land available for cultivation, simply reaches a point that it can't yield much more, given the existing technologies and forms of cultivation and organization. The elites, whether they were the traditional elite of merchants, of literati, or the new elites of merchants, were very conservative, were very concerned with protecting their wealth, their economic interests. We've seen, particularly for the literati, how repeatedly in the late imperial era of China, they had resisted efforts by the state to rationalize fiscal administration, to extract greater revenues from private sources. At the beginning of the 19th century, the strength of the literati elite remains very, very powerful. And with the passing of the Qianlong Emperor, we get a succession of emperors. We move into a period where, although there are still good emperors, they're not as powerful, they're not as charismatic, they're not as dynamic as Kangxi and Qianlong in particular had been. Frustrations, resentments amongst the populace begin to manifest themselves in the form of rebellions. It had been a long time, over a century, since there had been large-scale insurrections, popular movements directed against the Qing. But beginning late in the 18th century and then accelerating in the beginning of the 19th century, new forms of mystical movements amongst the peasantry, new forms of popular insurrection begin to break out, targeting both private interests, local landlords, local wealthy families, and representatives of the state, the local officials. As we've noted, the international context was also shifting. Trade becomes the great question. We've talked in the last lecture about the Industrial Revolution, about the rise of the doctrines of free trade, particularly flowing from the thought of Adam Smith. And both the increased economic capacity of the West and the changing ideology of free trade begins to come into conflict with the established relationship between China and the West, and particularly China and England, at this turning point of the 18th to 19th century. From about the middle of the 18th century, China had regulated its trade with the Western countries through what's called the Canton system, the Canton trade, or sometimes called the Kohong system. Under this system, trade only could take place in one location, in one port, which was Canton, or Guangzhou in Chinese, in the far south, as far away from the imperial capital as could reasonably be done. And that trade had to be conducted through middlemen, through agents, Chinese agents who were licensed by the state and who served as brokers between Western businessmen and Chinese businessmen. And these individuals were known as the Hong merchants. Now, this trade did function. It was quite a lively trade. But it was essentially a trade in which, as had been the pattern for centuries before this, the Western merchants brought silver to China, and with that silver, they then bought Chinese commodities, tea, silk, ceramics, lacquerware, other kinds of manufactured goods, which were in great demand in the West. This regulated system, this controlled system of trade was quite satisfactory to the Chinese. They were certainly making a lot of money and they had good outlets for their manufactured goods. It was in some ways satisfactory to the Western merchants because they were certainly acquiring goods which could be sold profitably in the West. But there was a sense that there was still great untapped potential, that there was still a tremendous amount of wealth to be had in dealing with China, if only a way could be found to sell the Chinese something which the Westerners had, which the Chinese wanted, and which the Chinese themselves would be willing to pay for, to pay perhaps not just in trade goods, but in silver, to reverse the flow of silver into China and start to balance it out a little better between the Europeans and the Chinese. In 1792, and again in 1816, sort of before and after the Napoleonic Wars, the great age of disruption in European affairs, the British sent diplomatic missions to China to try to open trade relations or to try to establish what the British thought of as normal diplomatic intercourse and commercial relations between England and the Qing government. In both instances, these missions were received very politely, but were told essentially that the Chinese were simply not interested. There's a very famous letter that the Qianlong Emperor writes and sends to King George III, in which he thanks the British king for his interest, but says, we have everything that we need within our empire. We have no need for the shoddy goods that you can offer us. We welcome you to come and trade with us, but it has to be on our terms and in our way. Well, this was considered really unacceptable by the British, who were increasingly fueled by the passionate ideology of free trade, and saw the Chinese as being not simply reluctant to enter into a proper trading relationship, but completely anachronistic. Indeed, essentially began to see the Chinese as barbarians for their refusal to recognize the desirability and the legitimacy of an international trade regime based upon the ideas of Adam Smith. The key to all this remained the question of what did the British have that the Chinese might want to buy. And after about 1816, after the Napoleonic Wars are over and the British are able to sort of devote their attention to all this more seriously again, they finally come up with the key that unlocks the door to the wealth of China. And the key proves to be opium. Opium was a substance that was already familiar to the Chinese. It was produced in relatively small quantities in the far southwest of China. It was known as a medicine, a substance that could be used for certain particular utilitarian purposes for a very long time. Its non-utilitarian purposes, its non-medicinal purposes, had also been known and recognized in China for a long time. And indeed, one of the things that the Yongzheng Emperor had done back in the 1730s as part of his sort of social legislation, was to impose regulations on opium, to restrict its use, to outlaw it as a recreational drug. So the Chinese were aware of opium and aware of some of the problems that perhaps came along with it. What the British found was that as they came into possession of increasing territories in India, and particularly in northeast India around Bengal, that they found the environment there, the farming conditions there, particularly suitable for the cultivation of opium. Opium was already grown there, but what the British did was to first go about undermining the existing cotton industry, in part, of course, because they didn't want competition with their expanding cotton industry and textile industry in England, but also because they wanted to convert the land which was being used for cotton production to opium production. And so this was done very aggressively, very assertively by the British authorities. And this resulted then in them having access to a large and growing supply of opium. They then discovered, first in Southeast Asia and then much more extensively in China, that they could market opium, particularly to the poorest strata of society, although people on all levels of Chinese society came to consume opium. And they discovered that indeed in South China there was a tremendous amount of potential demand for this commodity. And they began to ship opium in ever increasing volume from Bengal, from eastern India, around through Southeast Asia and up to the port at Canton, where it was offloaded and entered into the domestic economy of China. Between 1816 to 1830, the volume of opium shipped from India to China increased significantly every year. Well, the impact of this trade in China was dramatic. Millions of Chinese became addicted to opium. It became a tremendous social problem. People were not productive. The same kinds of concerns with crime and antisocial behavior that we associate with certain drug problems in contemporary society begin to manifest themselves in southern China in the context of the growing opium trade. On an economic level, the British were demanding payment for opium in silver. And this had the effect quite rapidly of reversing the flow of silver. Silver had been flowing into China. China had run a positive trade balance in terms of silver with the Western countries for centuries. In the decades from the mid 18 teens to the mid 1830s, that completely reverses, and silver begins to flow out of China at a very rapid rate, so much so that it leads to economic disruptions throughout the empire and starts to cause all sorts of adverse ripple effects within the domestic economy. And this, of course, comes to the attention of the government quite profoundly. By the 1830s, there were shortages of capital for investment. Prices were subject to dramatic fluctuation as the money supply was destabilized by the outflow of silver. And these kinds of economic effects, in addition to the adverse impact on social life that opium was having, began to be taken quite seriously by the Chinese government. The Qing state, however, was having problems dealing with these kinds of challenges. The government had become increasingly unresponsive. Conflicts, policy debates within the Qing leadership had bogged down. Efforts to deal creatively with problems were particularly frustrating because the bureaucratic mentality of always doing things the way they've always been done was quite was quite strong. And so to try to propose new solutions, to try to find ways to address problems that weren't based on well-established precedent, this was very difficult. Revenues were declining. The outflow of silver and its adverse effects upon the economy meant that taxes were not being collected as extensively, and the capacity of the government to maintain its normal functions, to simply do things like maintain the infrastructure of the Grand Canal, which tends to silt up and needs to be dredged and maintained in various ways. Well, money for these kinds of activities began to become hard to come by, and this resulted in further problems. And of course, each of these problems, as it develops, only aggravates the existing ones, and the situation tends to go from bad to worse. Well, the Chinese realized that the opium trade was, in many ways, at the heart of their problems. It was a serious concern in terms of its social impact, and it was a serious concern in terms of its economic impact. And so the emperor began to seek ways in which to address this problem, seek ways to control the trade, or indeed to eliminate it. Opium was, after all, illegal as a recreational drug in China. It was, of course, not widely available in that sense in the West either. The West was certainly aware of the adverse effects. The British were very aware of the adverse effects of opium. The Qing government repeatedly protested to the British authorities, to British traders, and to the representatives of the British merchants about the evils of opium and its adverse effects on Chinese society and economic life. And the emperor then called for a debate amongst his officials about how best to deal with this problem. Many expressed their opinions. There was a very lively policy discourse around this. One individual in particular caught the emperor's attention, and this is a man named Lin Zexu. Lin Zexu was an experienced official. He had served in Central Asia in dealing with the security problems of that the Qing faced with the Muslim populations in Central Asia. And he had distinguished himself as an official who was able to be flexible and creative in dealing with problems, and who was concerned not merely with the formalities of effective government, but with addressing the needs of the subjects, addressing the needs of the people. Lin Zexu submitted a proposal, a memorial to the emperor, in which he suggested basically a two-track approach to the opium problem. On the one hand, he had a rather compassionate program towards individuals who had become addicted to opium. He advocated rehabilitation programs, in essence, sort of job retraining programs, things that sound very familiar to modern day social reformers, to address the bad effects that opium addiction was having on people, to help them to shake their addictions, to give them ways to achieve more functional, more meaningful lives, and basically to address the demand for opium through these kinds of programs. At the same time, the other aspect of his program was one of strict prohibition of imports and sales. This was, after all, already the existing law. He simply advocated that it be enforced quite stringently. He felt that a combination of attacking the supply of opium by going after those who were importing and selling it, and undermining the demand for opium by providing these various social and rehabilitation programs for addicts, that these two approaches would, in combination, serve to eliminate this problem. Well, the emperor was very impressed with Lin Zexu's memorial, and it was debated and discussed at court. And eventually, in 1838, Lin Zexu was named to be imperial commissioner in charge of eradicating the opium trade in Canton. He travels south from the capital to Canton in the winter of 1838 to 1839, and in 1839 is finally ready to launch a serious campaign directed at stopping the flow of opium into China. He takes a very direct approach to this. In Canton, the foreign traders had warehouses, what they called factories, or sometimes they were called go-downs, places where their goods were brought ashore and stored before they were shipped off into to various destinations in the interior. Well, Lin Zexu, in the spring of 1839, ordered that opium, which was held in these warehouses, be confiscated. And a large quantity of opium was accordingly seized. And he had a large trench dug in the ground, and the opium was poured into this trench, dumped into the trench. Lime was then spread over it, and the whole concoction was burned. I gather that the lime was meant to, in some way, makes the burning of it more effective and less dangerous. When the Chinese destroyed these opium supplies, the British merchants, of course, were quite upset, and they demanded that something be done. The British military representatives at that time assured the merchants that they would be compensated by the crown, by the British crown, but Lin Zexu proved to be intent upon keeping the trade under control, keeping the trade shut down. And so the British, who thought that perhaps this was just a sort of one-off demonstration and that some more pragmatic solution which would allow them to continue to trade might be found, were quite upset when it turned out that Lin Zexu had no intention of allowing the trade to resume. After a second round of destroying opium and no compensation being forthcoming, the British decided that they had to take action. The British debated this. There was quite a debate in Parliament over what to do about China. It is a debate which is framed largely not in terms of the opium trade, but on the more lofty principles of free trade in general. The British did not wish to present themselves, of course, as a drug cartel, which is essentially what they were, but instead argued on the basis of an economic doctrine. And so when war is declared and when the British fleet is sent out to attack China, it is done not on the basis of making the world safe for drug dealers, but on the basis of promoting the doctrines of free trade. Well, British military superiority, which was unquestioned at that time, the British fleet, British armaments, the industrialized British military, which had technologically been upgraded very, very significantly by the transformations of economic life in the West since the end of the 18th century, the British were able to inflict humiliating defeats upon the Chinese, and did so repeatedly. The war begins in 1839. It goes on until 1842. There are a series of periods of great activity. British naval forces sail into various ports along the South China coast and shell the cities, terrorizing the local population. When they come far enough north and begin to look like they might approach the imperial capital region, the Chinese enter into negotiations. But those negotiations go on over a very long time. The British launch a second phase of military activities, which brings them very close to the capital in the north. And this finally impels the Chinese side to reach a settlement. That settlement takes the form in 1842 of what's called the Treaty of Nanjing, signed between the British and the Chinese government, the Qing government. It did a number of things. It opened a series of ports along the South China coast to British traders and allowed them to establish commercial residences in those ports. These come to be known as the treaty ports, of course, based on the Treaty of Nanjing itself. And they could trade freely without using the Kohong brokers. It ceded the island of Hong Kong, which had been occupied by the British and used as a base. It ceded that to Britain for 100 years. Eventually, of course, that is expanded and territory adjacent on the mainland is added to that, and that all remains in British hands until 1997. The Treaty of Nanjing also established a very important principle, which is called the principle of extraterritoriality. And the principle of extraterritoriality basically says that while British citizens are in China, they will be subject not to the laws of China, but to the laws of Britain. In other words, if they commit a crime in China, they will not be arrested and prosecuted by the Chinese authorities, but will be dealt with by the British. This was in response to a number of instances in which British sailors who had been ashore in Canton had been involved in violent incidents of one type or another, and had been arrested and prosecuted by the Chinese, and were treated in ways which the British felt were inappropriate for subjects of the crown. And so to protect foreigners in China, particularly the British themselves, they imposed the element of extraterritoriality in the Treaty of Nanjing. Well, the Treaty of Nanjing is signed in 1842 in rapid succession over the ensuing 2 or 3 years. Other Western powers also signed treaties with China. The United States signs its first treaty, I believe, in 1844. The French, the Dutch, the Russians all get in on the action fairly quickly. These treaties, each one adds a little more to the concessions which are being extracted from the Chinese. More ports are to be opened. A very important feature of these treaties is that they include what's called the No Most Favored Nation clause, which says that any concession which is granted to one power in a treaty automatically extends to all the powers which have treaties with China. So this sort of shares the benefits of imperialism amongst the foreign powers. Foreign missionaries were given legal protection to operate in China, to go into the interior on their proselytizing work. Excuse me. These provisions, the various aspects of the Treaty of Nanjing, are quite humiliating for the Chinese. China had, of course, always thought of itself in some ways as the center of the known world. The very name that's used for China in many instances of Zhongguo means the Middle Kingdom, the Central Kingdom. The traditional system of international relations in East Asia was one which was very focused on China as the center. When the Chinese dealt with the Westerners prior to the Opium War, they dealt with them as people who came almost from outside the realm of civilization. Now, to be defeated militarily, to be forced to sign treaties which opened up Chinese territory to the residents of foreigners, which took away from the Chinese the ability to govern and regulate trade. This was a tremendous blow to the sensibilities of the Qing government and of the Chinese people in general. The opening of the treaty ports beyond this sort of psychological dimension had significant economic impacts. Of course, the extension of the opium trade further exacerbated the problems associated with that. But even where there were, in some ways, positive impacts economically, where trade expanded or where the ports grew in their own context, the dislocations that this caused in other parts of the Chinese economy sometimes were quite severe. They sometimes led to rather unanticipated consequences. And we'll explore one particular instance of that that gives rise to a great rebellion, the Taiping Rebellion, in the next lecture. China's defeat by Britain in the Opium War and the opening of China to greater European influence, greater Western influences with the Treaty of Nanjing and the other treaties that other Western powers signed in the ensuing years, created new circumstances that put a lot of stress on the social life of southern China. Some of this, of course, came from the effects of the opium trade, the spread of addiction, but others were related to more fundamentally economic causes. The opening of the treaty ports, for example, resulted in the reorientation of traditional trade routes. People who had been involved in the transportation of goods in China's interior were in some instances thrown out of work as ports along the coast assumed a greater role in trade, and interior markets were accordingly neglected somewhat. There were a variety of other effects that began to be felt in, particularly in southern China, in the wake of these new circumstances. There were, of course, already plenty of problems within within Chinese society, as we've talked about, stemming out of some of the weaknesses in the system, overpopulation, the limits on further economic expansion, stemming out of the population growth from the 17th and 18th centuries. Southern China, by the middle of the 19th century, was a place that was in many ways ready for fairly catastrophic events, and they came along quite appropriately. The particular circumstances of South China, because of its geography, because of the way that we've talked about several times, that it's hillier, population tends to be not spread so smoothly around the region, but concentrated in the lowlands and the valleys and coastal plain areas. There were in certain areas of southern China, particularly the rural parts of Guangdong province, southern parts of Hunan province, there were local ethnic groups, local populations that had very distinctive cultural traditions. And one of these, not one of the formerly indigenous people, the people who had been displaced by Chinese migration and had moved up into the highlands, but actually people who had migrated from northern China themselves, who were themselves Chinese, but who were seen by their neighbors as different, people who are known as the Hakka, or in Mandarin, the Gejia, the guest families. These were families, northern Chinese families, who had moved to the south later on, after the initial waves of Chinese migrants had come south. And they therefore brought with them a culture, a northern culture, which was a little different from that which had evolved in local society. And they retained that distinctive quality. Indeed, they retain that distinctive sort of identity even today. Well, the Hakka people, because they were kind of marginal, somewhat outsiders in the larger context of South Chinese society, tended to really take care of each other, tended to be very self-reliant. But they were affected particularly strongly by some of the consequences of the opening of the treaty ports and of the internal problems that Qing society was facing early in the 18th century. And this made them perhaps more receptive to new ideas, more receptive to unusual ideas which were not part of the traditional cultural scene in China. an individual appears in South China who presents a really interesting story, who we're going to look at here, and I have to sort of put him into a special context because it's unlike anything we've really dealt with thus far. This is a man whose name is Hong Shou-Chuen, and Hong Shou-Chuen was himself a Hakka, so he starts off as something of a special in a sort of special situation. He was from a family that was not particularly wealthy, but was well enough off that they had been able to allow him to be educated and to prepare to take the examinations. And his ambition, his hope was that through success in the examinations, he would be able to lift his family fortunes. So there was a lot invested in him, a lot invested in his education, a lot materially invested, and a lot psychologically invested in this idea that he was going to, in some ways, be the salvation of his family. He repeatedly took the entry-level examinations to get a start into the Confucian examination system, but each time he sat for the examinations, he failed. He was never successful in passing even the entry-level examinations. Now, to take these examinations, he would go into the large city of Guangzhou, or Canton as we know it. And when he would be in the city, of course, it was a very lively and dynamic city. It was a port city. It was a city where there was a strong Western presence, even before the Opium War, as the focal point of the trade with foreigners. And it was a city where he encountered people and ideas that were very different, very unfamiliar, very alien. Among the unusual people that he may have encountered in Guangzhou were Christian missionaries. And we know that, in fact, during one of his visits to take the exams, he was given a set of writings, of missionary tracts, which he didn't apparently pay a lot of attention to immediately, but took home with him, read them through, didn't really understand what all this was about, and sort of set them aside. A few years later, during another effort to pass the exams, another unsuccessful effort to pass the exams, he basically exhausted himself. He had studied so hard, worked so hard, and then the stress of the exams was so difficult, and the psychological blow of yet another failure seems to have caused him to have a kind of breakdown. He goes home, he takes to his bed, he spends weeks basically just trying to shut the world out. During that time, he had dreams or visions in which an old gentleman with a long white beard and a younger man with a dark beard appeared to him and talked with him. When he recovered from his breakdown, when he was back on his feet, he was reflecting on his dreams or his vision, and he took down these Christian tracts, which he had been given years before, and he read through them again, and he had a sudden revelation, which was that the old man in the dream and the vision was God, the young man with the dark beard was Jesus, and that what they had been telling him was that he, Hong Shou-Chuen, was the younger brother of Jesus, and that it was his mission to bring the story of Christianity to the Chinese people. This launches him upon his life's work, and he abandons the idea of trying to pass the Confucian examinations, and indeed begins to develop an understanding of the world in which the whole Confucian system, the whole imperial order of China, is now seen as something that he has to overcome, something that he must speak out against, something that he must seek to do away with. Okay? And he therefore begins to create a movement with himself as the focal point to establish on earth a heavenly kingdom. Okay, this comes to be called the Taiping Tianguo, which means the heavenly kingdom of great peace. Okay, and this becomes Hong Shou-Chuen's mission. At first, in the late 1830s and the beginning of the 1840s, this takes the form of something that he calls the Society of God Worshippers. Okay, And many of the people who were initially involved with the Society of God Worshippers were themselves from the Hakka community, but it grew beyond just being identified with this one particular social group. The Hakka are very important in the beginning of the Taiping movement because they give a body of followers with a high degree of social cohesion that Hong Xiuquan can work with when it gets started. But it is always his ambition to take this beyond just being a Hakka centered phenomenon and to make it something which is for all the Chinese people. It's clear that right from the start, he has this vision of establishing the heavenly kingdom on earth for all the Chinese people. Well, Hong Xiuquan continues to have visions. He continues to develop a theological system in which his role as the younger brother of Jesus is the principal feature. As far as we can tell, he never reads the Christian Bible. His understanding of Christianity is almost entirely derived from these few simple missionary tracts which he had acquired and read through. He does later on undertake some more serious study of Christianity, but he certainly is not a scholar of the church or anything like that. Instead, his appeal is based apparently on his own personal charisma. His faith in himself, his belief in his mission was apparently quite compelling, and he attracts around himself a core of followers, some of whom were well educated, some of whom were fairly well-to-do people, merchants and others like that, even some officials. But the vast majority of his followers, of course, were ordinary farmers. They established in rural western Guangdong province, northwest of the great city of Canton, a kind of utopian commune based upon Hong Xiuquan's understanding of the sort of principles of primitive Christian communism. They had a very radical egalitarianism. There were to be no ranks, no hierarchy, which of course was a very thorough break with the Confucian idea of a well-ordered society in which everybody was in a certain hierarchical relationship to one another. For the Taiping, it was a very egalitarian vision. They abolished within the commune private property. Everything was to be shared communally. Everything was to be owned in common. Indeed, as time went by, they took on some very extreme sort of characteristics. There were sexual Puritans. In fact, they segregated men and women so that they lived in separate dormitories. Families were broken up. Marriage was seen as part of the traditional Confucian system, which needed to be rejected. It was a very thorough, a very comprehensive system for organizing society in ways which in many ways inverted the basic principles of the Confucian order. This apparently had a tremendous appeal because thousands and thousands of people came to take part in this movement. And in the course of the 1840s, it grew and it expanded territorially, and the number of people involved got to be greater and greater. And in the course of that, Hong Xiuquan's ambitions also grew, also developed, and he went from simply having a vision of a community that was separate from Chinese society, that was sort of a pure retreat from Chinese society, to taking that movement, taking that community as a base for launching an assault on the existing order and for trying to overthrow the Qing dynasty and to establish the heavenly kingdom right now, right there on earth in China. In 1850, they reached the point where it was time to act on these ambitions, and Hong Shou-chuen, along with a number of his other leaders, he evolves a system in which he is the heavenly king, and then he had four sort of subordinate assistant kings who represented the different cardinal directions: the king of the east, the north, the south, the west, and they were sort of the governing elite, the central leadership within the Taiping movement as a whole. So under that leadership, in 1850, they launch a military campaign, and they move from Guangdong province in the far south of China. They start to head north. They fight their way up through central China, through Hunan province, which borders on Guangdong at the south, and on the Yangtze River at the north. And so they make their way up through Hunan province. They fight against the armies of the Qing dynasty and defeat them and drive them away. As they go, their appeal to the peasants of Hunan, their appeal to the poor, the marginalized populations of central China is quite effective. And large numbers of people flock to join the Taiping movement. And as it progresses north, it just gets bigger and bigger and bigger as it goes along. When they reach the Yangtze River, they turn east and head downriver until they come to Nanjing, which was a great city, one of the truly great cities of the empire. It had, of course, been the southern capital during the Ming dynasty, and even under the Qing, although it no longer had the role of being a secondary imperial capital, it was the seat of government for that part of China, and it still had its ancient city walls. It still had the palaces of the former Ming emperors. It was a very, very wealthy and rich, glorious city. The Taiping occupy Nanjing and proclaim it to be their heavenly capital. And from 1854, when they finally reach Nanjing, they make it the center of their movement for the next 10 years. During that decade, especially in the first 2 or 3 years, they continue to fight to try to expand their territory. They send an expedition to the north that doesn't really succeed very well. It fights its way north, but then turns and heads back south without really reaching the Qing capital at Beijing, and returns to Nanjing. They also fight in the area south and east of Nanjing, and indeed over time the territory that they control sort of shifts around. Initially they have more strength in the west, but later on their control shifts over further to the east. Once they are in Nanjing, the Heavenly Kingdom undergoes some changes which prove to be quite problematic. Most particularly, once they occupy this great capital city, Hong Shou-chuen and the other kings move into the former imperial palaces. And when they settle in there, they begin to really live a much more imperial kind of life. They eat very well, they have lots of luxuries, and perhaps most significantly, they establish a kind of harem for themselves in the imperial residence. Meanwhile, the vast majority of Taiping followers continue to live in circumstances of Puritanism, egalitarianism, and indeed relative poverty. As many as 100 million people seem to have been involved in the Taiping movement at its peak. This was perhaps a quarter of the population of China. They controlled a significant territory, several southern provinces, parts of Jiangsu and Jiangxi, Zhejiang province on the coast, Hunan province and Hubei province in central China. At least parts of all these provinces were under Taiping control. So it was geographically a very extensive space and controlled a very large population. Now, the differential in lifestyle that emerges once they reach Nanjing begins to be a problem. There's some resentment on the part of ordinary members of the Taiping movement towards this luxurious lifestyle that Hong Xiuquan and the other kings are leading. The enthusiasm of ordinary families, ordinary people, for this very austere lifestyle, for the sexual segregation, for the breaking up of families, seems to have waned as time went on. It was very difficult to maintain that level of intensity and enthusiasm year after year after year, particularly once they had settled in with Nanjing as the capital, and once the phase of real active military campaigning had come to an end. So tensions begin to build up within the Taiping community, within the Taiping kingdom itself. Well, while all this is going on, of course, the dynasty has to respond in some way. The outburst of the Taiping movement in South China and its march up through Hunan and then its occupation of Nanjing, these are very, very problematic from the point of view of the government. The Qing dynasty has suffered these great military defeats and humiliations at the hands of the British and the other Western powers. And now they have to deal with this very, very serious threat from within. They're not very effective initially at doing so. The military situation within the country is not good. The Qing dynasty military system had two basic components. On the one hand were what were called the banners, and this was the military system of the Manchus themselves, which they had built up before the conquest, had been the system they used in conquering China. And Manchu banners, which were not solely composed of Manchu people, there were Chinese and Mongol and other ethnic members within the banner system. But the banner troops were sort of the elite troops. But then there were also what was called the Green Standard Army, which were the ordinary Chinese troops. And there were many, many more of these than there were of the banner forces. But both the banner forces and the Green Standard Army by the 1850s were not in very good shape. They weren't very well trained. Discipline wasn't very high. They weren't very well equipped. Many of the banner troops hadn't seen action in over a century. They tended to preserve their traditions, but not very well. And the Green Standard Army hadn't been used extensively since the suppression of Wu Songwe's rebellion back in the 1670s and early 1680s. So these were not military organizations in their fighting prime. And they melted away to a large extent as the Taiping made their way north. The dynasty then had to find a way to make a more effective response. And what they did was to turn to a new source of organization and a new source of support for military activities. What they wound up doing, and this becomes very significant politically, even after the Taipings are suppressed, was to turn to local Chinese elites. As we've seen in the past, going all the way back certainly to the Sung dynasty, and in many ways even prior to that, the local elites, the literati, in their capacity as the wealthy families in local communities, performed a lot of quasi-governmental functions, and these often included providing local kinds of security, perhaps local militias, anti-bandit activities, things like that. Well, now the Qing state decides to appeal to local leaders to assume a greater role in what they're arguing is basically local self-defense. And the classic example of this is a man called Zheng Guofan. Zheng Guofan was from Hunan province, which had been the province that the Taiping had marched through and which the imperial military had been completely unable to defend. Zheng Guofan is given the responsibility on the one hand, but also the authority by the Qing government to organize local troops, to come up with some new way to put together an effective military force in central China. Most significantly, or most helpfully, he's also given a new financial basis to do this on. Part of the problem with the banner troops and the Green Standard Army is that they're not paid very well. There's not resources in the imperial treasuries to support them. Well, Zheng Guofan is given control over a new source of revenue, and this is what's called the Legion, which is a kind of it's a tariff on trade in local trade. Okay, if goods are moving about within Hunan province or into the province or out of the province at various border stations, very modest tariffs are collected. But Hunan is a very wealthy province. It's a province where there's a lot of trade going on. It's a big tea growing province, a rice exporting province. And so there's a fair amount of trade to be taxed. And the Legion becomes a new source of revenue. And the revenue that's generated through these tariffs is put into Zheng Guofan's hands. He's like, here's your funds. Use these. Do something to put these Taiping down. Well, Zheng Guofan proves to be more than equal to the task. And he takes these resources. He recruits soldiers. He hires professionals to help train them. And very quickly, he puts together what comes to be called, not surprisingly, the Hunan Army. Other local leaders in other parts of central China also get involved in this process. Zheng Guofan is perhaps the best known and in some ways sort of the theoretician of all this. He writes a lot about it, and these writings are still very popular in China even today. He equips the Hunan Army with the latest kinds of weaponry. He pays them well, clothes them well, feeds them well. They're very well disciplined. And he then begins, towards the end of the 1850s, beginning of the 1860s, to deploy them in campaigns directed against the Taiping Heavenly Kingdom. The Western powers also have an interesting role in all this. The treaty ports that are opened in the wake of the Treaty of Nanjing, the Opium War, are along the South China coast. The most northerly of them is Shanghai, which, when it is opened as a treaty port, is a relatively obscure fishing village, but grows quite quickly since it's the treaty port closest to the mouth of the Yangtze River, grows quite quickly to be a very, very large city. And by the time that the Taiping Rebellion is in full swing, and by the time the Taiping are occupying Nanjing, although it's only been about a decade since Shanghai is opened as a treaty port, it has already grown to have a significant Western presence. It becomes, in a sense, sort of the capital of the Europeans in China. Now, the Europeans find themselves in an interesting situation because Hong Xiuquan claims to be a Christian. He presents his rebellion as a Christian movement. He is, of course, Jesus' younger brother, so he appeals to the Westerners in many ways as a figure that might be easier to deal with, that might be better to deal with than the Qing government. The Qing government are after all, heathens, non-Christians, barbarians, however you want to think of it. And so there's an interest on the part of at least some in the Western community about what's going on with this heavenly kingdom, with this Hong Xiuquan fellow. They send a diplomatic delegation to Nanjing that meets with the Taiping leader. And the result of this is that they come to see Hong Xiuquan not as someone that can be allied with, not as someone that can be really sort of integrated into the Christian community, but they come to see him basically as a lunatic, as someone who is has delusions and who is claiming a divine status for himself. And of course, this is not really going to work very well with established Christian teachings and doctrine. So the Western powers do not decide to rally to the support of the Taiping, and indeed, after some reflection, they decide that their interests are best served by sustaining the role of the Qing state. And so there's some Western military intervention in support of the Qing government. Well, in 1864, the Taiping kingdom finally falls. Zheng Guofan's Hunan army defeats and destroys the last remnants of the Heavenly Kingdom. There are great massacres when Nanjing is taken, and in other places, great battles are fought and won by the Qing. And the rebellion, which was only one of a number of challenges, but certainly the greatest, the most dynamic one in the middle of the 19th century of domestic rebellions in China, is put down, is brought to an end. By this time, the West has established its position quite firmly. The Qing state now is something which the Western powers want to preserve and maintain. Their role, minimal as it may have been, in the suppression of the Taiping is significant. The Chinese now have to decide, and the Manchu rulers have to decide, where they're going from here. How can they respond to the continued presence of the West, the continued threat that that implies? We'll see some of the efforts that they make in the next lecture. China's defeat in the Opium War and then the trauma of the Great Taiping Rebellion in the middle of the 19th century shook the foundations of the Qing dynasty quite profoundly. The dynasty survived both these challenges, but it knew, or at least some within the leadership knew, that if China wanted to flourish again, if China wanted to ever reclaim a more upright position in the community of nations, that some sort of change was going to have to take place. In the years from the 1860s through the early 1890s, certain leaders, both within the Chinese and the Manchu elites, began to pursue a program designed to give China the ability to stand up to the Western powers, to not have to simply accept the humiliations of economic dependency, of the treaties, the unequal treaties as they came to be called, the doctrines such as extraterritoriality, under which foreigners were not subject to Chinese law but only to their own regulation. This movement from the 1860s through the early 1890s comes to be called the self-strengthening movement. The idea being that China couldn't rely on outsiders, couldn't rely on the foreign powers to take care of it. They obviously were pursuing their own interests, which were often antithetical to those of China. If China wished to be strong enough to assume its own control of its own destiny, they had to strengthen themselves. And so the self-strengthening movement is the response of some leaders within the Chinese government to these challenges. The 1860s was a time when it was possible to make some changes in China, in the Qing government, because a young emperor had come to the throne in 1860. And being young, he was subject to a regency, a council of his elders who guided his reign. And those elders, among them were some officials who were very receptive to the need for new solutions to the problems China was facing. Leaders like Zheng Guofan, that we mentioned in the last lecture, who became a military reformer and put together the Hunan army that was so critical in the suppression of the Taiping movement, and other provincial leaders amongst the Chinese emerged in the course of the self-strengthening movement to really provide the brains of an effort to get China back on its own feet. The 1870s and 1880s are really the core of the self-strengthening period. During that time, the Chinese undertook a number of fairly diverse initiatives to try to improve their situation. On one hand, they recognized that the superior position of the West was largely founded simply on military strength. The British in the Opium War in 1839 to 42 had not really met serious resistance from the Chinese. The superiority of British weapons the superiority of British naval vessels was so clear that the Chinese realized, that the self-strengthening leaders realized that they were going to have to find a way to counter that. And the way to do that was to develop their own modern military sector. Part of the way they went about this was to simply try to buy ships and equipment from the Western powers. But they recognized that even that was not enough. If they really wanted to develop a sense of self-reliance, if they really wanted China to be able to advance on the military front, they had to be responsible for their own armaments. The British, who sold the Chinese a number of warships and other military systems in the second half of the 19th century, were always very careful to make sure that the equipment that they sold was outdated and often obsolete from their own military perspective. They were willing to sell it off to the Chinese, knowing that it would not be equal to the equipment that they themselves were currently putting in the field. So if the Chinese wanted to keep up with, to try to catch up with the British in any way, they were going to have to do this on the basis of their own resources. Accordingly, they established a great arsenal and a great shipyard. The shipyard near the mouth of the Yangtze River, the arsenal near the central Chinese city of Hankou, which is part of the much larger urban area of Wuhan today, also on the Yangtze River. The arsenal at Wuhan was also near sources of coal and iron ore, so that they were able to begin the process of developing a steel industry as well, which initially was designed to supply military needs, but eventually extended beyond that as well. So developing a modern Western-style military was one priority for the self-strengthening reformers. The second, which was certainly not unrelated, had to do with learning about Western science and technology. This was, of course, fundamental to successfully opening and operating these industries and armaments factories and things like that. But there was a recognition that Western superiority went beyond just the military field. There was an understanding of sorts about the nature of industrial production in Europe, particularly in England, and a sense that Western science gave to the imperialist powers part of the strength that allowed them to dominate China. So the Qing government set up a bureau for translating Western books and publishing them and circulating them amongst the educated elite in China. Initially, these were focused primarily on very practical books, books about science and technology. But after a large number of those had been translated, they also began to look at works on social science, works on political theory, and particularly, they became particularly interested with a lot of the Western writing at this time that we can associate with the idea of social Darwinism, the idea that that societies, that nations compete, and that international relations was in some ways a kind of survival of the fittest. And of course, this fit in nicely with the thinking of the self-strengthening reformers, because what they wanted to do was make China fitter in the competition for survival. Finally, they realized a third dimension of the self-strengthening movement was a realization that there was a need to restructure the way that China related to other countries in the world. The international order which the Qing dynasty was used to functioning in, and which had been the norm for previous dynasties, was one in which China was at the center, and other countries generally were expected to come and pay their respects. It's often referred to as the tribute system. Delegations from countries around China would come to the capital and pay their respects to the emperor and offer various kinds of tribute goods, and the emperor would then give them very rich presents that they would take back to their country. And this was seen as sort of a normal pattern of relations, where other countries paid homage and respect to China. Obviously, this wasn't working with the Western powers, and China was forced to pay homage and respect to the British and the French and the Americans and all the other Western powers. They recognized, though, that amongst the Western powers, there was a system which was supposedly based on equality among nations. The very concept of treaties between nations is based on the idea that both parties are equal, that they sign these agreements. These are essentially contracts between nations, and so they should be signed between equal parties. The real content of the treaties that were in place in the 19th century were unequal. They were dictated, the terms were dictated by the power of the Western countries, and China simply had to basically accept whatever was offered to them. But they realized that the rhetoric, at least, of international law, of international relations, was one that was based upon diplomatic relations amongst equal partners. And to give China the ability to participate more fully in that system, they created a new institutional structure for China's international relations, which was focused on what's called the Zhongliyamen. The Zhongliyamen was a sort of foreign ministry, and that was what the governmental body, which then became responsible for handling diplomatic interaction with the Western powers. These efforts were certainly very sincere and pursued quite assiduously by their advocates, but they were really not sufficient to solve the problems that China was confronted with. For one thing, the self-strengtheners, although many of the leading officials in China at the time participated in the movement, were never a real majority. They were never the dominant group within the imperial bureaucracy or even within the councils of state at the capital. They were prestigious. They were certainly successful individuals within the imperial system, but as a movement, they never came to be the real mainstream of Chinese policy. And resistance to modernization was perhaps more characteristic of the conservative majority amongst Chinese officials. So there were efforts to undermine the position of the self-strengtheners. There were efforts to sort of preserve the old ways, a very classic bureaucratic mentality. We don't want to do new things. We don't want to try new approaches because this is the way things have always been done. And there was certainly plenty of that mentality within the Chinese and Manchu elites. The insufficiency of the self-strengthening movement begins to be demonstrated in the mid-1880s when China was defeated in a war with France. France was at this point attempting to establish, and indeed being successful in establishing, their control over Indochina. Vietnam in particular had always been a close ally, almost a dependency of China, and they appealed to China, to the Qing, to defend them against the French. And the Chinese did indeed send part of their modernized navy down to the Gulf of Tonkin, but they were defeated by the French. And this was a further humiliation and certainly a setback for the self-strengtheners. 10 years later, the failures of the self-strengthening movement really were most clearly revealed in a war between China and Japan. Without going into the details of the history of Japan at this time, suffice it to say that when Japan had been forcibly opened by the Western powers, by the United States in the 1850s, they had decided to embark upon a campaign of modernization in a thoroughgoing, all-out kind of way. The Meiji Restoration in the late 1860s set the Japanese on a course of out-and-out modernization, industrialization, westernization. And by the end of the 19th century, they had gone a long way to achieving those objectives. They had developed their economy, developed their military, established their position in the system of international relations, almost on a par with that of the great Western powers. This was demonstrated in the War of 1894 to 1895, which was fought largely in Korea and over issues of who was going to control Korea, but in the course of which the Japanese simply inflicted one defeat after another on the Chinese. On land, they defeated the modernized forces of the Chinese army, and at sea, they were successful in destroying much of the modern component of the Chinese fleet. So the war, the Sino-Japanese War, as it's called, was an even greater humiliation for China. It was one thing to be defeated by the Europeans. They were barbarians, yes, but they were foreign strangers. No one really knew much about them prior to the Opium War. There was almost a disdain on the part of the Chinese to learn that much about these Europeans until they had to be taken seriously based on their military strength. The Japanese were very familiar and had always been seen as sort of little brothers, sort of junior partners in the cultural system of East Asia. To have the Japanese now inflict this kind of military humiliation on China was very dispiriting, to say the least. In fact, the defeat, which was finalized in a treaty, the Treaty of Shimonoseki in 1895, triggers a protest movement in China. Candidates for the imperial examinations assembling at the capital in Beijing circulate a petition which gets several thousand signatures and is submitted to the court, demanding that a more effective response to imperialist aggression be made. Leaders of this movement, in particular a man named Kang Youwei and another Liang Qichao, Kang and Liang worked very closely together, began to write articles, began to publish newspapers, wrote memorials to the throne. Both Kang and Liang had passed the examinations and were minor officials and had the right to submit memorials to the throne. They were joined in this by other officials in other parts of China as well. They advocated that the Qing government adopt a more thoroughgoing program of reform, not just of sort of piecemeal modernization, but of complete institutional restructuring to give China a more effective modern-style government, in some ways along the lines of what the Japanese had been doing since the Meiji Restoration. In 1898, after 3 years of agitation around these themes, the reformers got a chance to put their ideas into action. The emperor at that time, known as the Guangxu Emperor, had come to the throne as a very young man and had been dominated by his ancestor, the Empress Dowager Cixi, a very, very famous and powerful woman in Chinese history. But in the early 1890s, Cixi had sort of retired from the day-to-day oversight of the court and had allowed Guangxu to assume more responsibility for managing the affairs of state. Well, in 1898, Guangxu is convinced by the arguments of the reformers that it's necessary to save China to embark on a program of fairly radical reform. And from the middle of June till the middle of September 1898, we have what comes to be called the 100 Days, the 100 Days of Reform. And in this period, Guangxu listened to the advice of a number of his officials. He received further ideas from Kang Youwei and Liang Qichao and others. And he issued a series of edicts designed to streamline administration, to reduce bureaucracy, to open up the channels for popular input so he could know more about what was going on in the empire and what the desires and aspirations of ordinary people were. He appointed a number of the advocates of reform to high positions, including in the Grand Council, and appeared to be quite well embarked upon a process of transforming the machinery of the imperial state. But as with the self-strengtheners, there were many people in the Qing establishment who were uncomfortable, who were quite resistant to the 100 Days reforms, and who either simply ignored them, sort of passively sat things out, waiting to see how things would really develop, or actively resisted them, simply refused to implement them, or conspired to try to undermine the reformers. Eventually, in mid-September, conservative Manchu officials and some Chinese officials, in particular a man named Yuan Shikai, who was, ironically enough, commander of the modern troops within the Chinese army, decided that the reforms had gone too far, and they, along with Cixi, the Empress Dowager, resolved to put an end to this, to put a stop to this. And accordingly, the emperor was effectively placed under house arrest. The leading reformers were rounded up. 8 of them were executed. Kang Youwei and Liang Qichao managed to get tipped off and fled Beijing, made their way to Shanghai, eventually to Japan. And the reforms were brought to a complete halt. This ended what had been perhaps the last best hope for getting the Qing dynasty onto a course of modernization, which might have given it the capacity to enter into a modern political era, an era where it could have remained as the effective government and leadership of China. But by terminating the reforms, by bringing this process to an abrupt and violent end, Cixi had signaled that a more conservative orientation, a more traditional orientation was going to remain dominant. While these events were transpiring in the capital, other things had been going on out in provincial life, which now began to come together with high-level elite politics, and really brings about a very violent conclusion to the 19th century, and sets the stage for the final collapse of the dynasty. And this is what we know as the Boxer Rebellion. Now, the Boxer Rebellion is, in many ways, part of a long tradition of popular peasant movements in Chinese history, in Chinese society. If we go all the way back to the Han Dynasty, we talked a little bit about the peasant rebellions late in the 2nd century that were part of the collapse of the Han. Similar movements were involved in the fall of many dynasties as the course of Chinese history progressed. Often these popular movements were religious in nature or had a strong spiritual component, and that is certainly the case with the Boxers. The name that we use for this group, we call them the Boxers, is based upon the fact that it arises from, and their leaders certainly were involved in, a martial arts school, a martial arts movement. They believed that by practicing certain kinds of exercises, spiritual exercises, and physical exercises, they would make themselves invulnerable. They would assume sort of supernatural powers, and they would not, for example, be hurt by bullets fired from the guns of the Westerns. This was a movement that spread quite rapidly. It had its center in the western part of Shandong province, a little southeast of the capital. And this was an area that had its own very particular circumstances. It was an area that was relatively poor. It was an area where popular peasant movements had arisen many times in the past, earlier in the 19th century. And it was an area also where there was a very strong foreign presence. The Germans, in particular, had acquired concessions in Shandong province at the city of Qingdao, which, of course, is where they establish a brewery, which is still very popular today. But the German presence in Shandong went far beyond Qingdao, and indeed there were many German missionaries in the interior of Shandong province. And this fed into a number of problems in local society. The missionaries, of course, were seen as aliens, as foreigners intruding into China. But Chinese who converted to Christianity, who took up the Christian message, were also seen as problematic in local society. For one thing, some Chinese became Christians perhaps not out of a completely sincere religious experience, but because there were material benefits to be gained. Benefits in terms of access to charity, access to food supplies sometimes. So these people were often disparaged as rice Christians by their neighbors, but also protection. The missionaries were under the protection of the Qing government, under the terms of the treaties, and often Christians, Chinese Christians, would use their affiliation with this foreign religion to gain an advantage in lawsuits or other kinds of disputes in local society. So there was a lot of resentment, a lot of tension that focused around the presence of the German missionaries. The Boxers took it upon themselves to basically purify their communities, to purify their society. They were pretty much localized in Western Shandong to begin with, but they had the sense of being part of a great national empire-wide movement or mission to free China from the domination and control of the foreign barbarians. Initially, the Boxers directed part of their antipathy towards representatives of the Qing government. Because the Qing government, under the terms of the treaties, protected the Christian missionaries and Chinese Christians, the Qing government was seen as perhaps being equally part of the problem. But especially after the suppression of the reforms of 1898, the Qing government began to sort of change its tune and began to be more sympathetic, more encouraging to movements like the Boxers. And the governor of Shandong province made a number of proclamations about, the Boxers aren't such a bad thing, and we should support and encourage their sort of their patriotic spirit. I'm going to use those terms, but that kind of idea. That encouragement by 1898 led the Boxers to sort of step up their activities, and they became a much more aggressive and dynamic movement. And as they did so, they also began to attract larger and larger numbers of followers. In the winter of 1899 to 1900, they moved out of Shandong province and began to make their way north towards Tianjin. Tianjin was a great treaty port southeast of Beijing. And eventually, by the summer of 1900, they marched on the imperial capital. They entered into the capital. They were well received. The imperial army did not try to keep them out or inhibit their activity. And indeed, the Empress Dowager, Cixi, who was now firmly in control of the government, proclaimed that she was on the side of the Boxers. The Boxers began to confront the Westerners that they found in Beijing. And by June of 1900, they laid siege to the diplomatic quarter or the legation quarter in the eastern side of the city of Beijing, where all the foreign countries had their diplomatic missions. This siege lasted for some 55 days and was only lifted when an international military force with components from 8 different countries, including, most interestingly perhaps, Japan, which was now seen as a sort of equal partner with the other imperialist powers, fought their way from Tianjin up along the railway line and entered Beijing at the middle of August, and were able to defeat the Boxers and relieve the siege of the diplomatic corps. The Western powers then occupied Beijing. The emperor and the Empress Dowager fled, ran away from the capital. This was, of course, yet another tremendous humiliation. The mystical power of the Boxers to resist foreign weapons proved to be completely meaningless. There was no substance to that, of course. And this left the Qing state once more prostrate before the Western powers. A treaty is signed to allow the Qing government to resume its activities. The Empress Dowager and the Emperor are to come back to the capital. Certain Chinese government leaders who had supported the Boxers were executed. Of course, many of the Boxers were killed. Under the terms of what comes to be known as the Boxer Protocol, China was forced to pay an indemnity to the Western powers, large amounts of money, which they could ill afford, and which they had to draw from their maritime customs receipts. The maritime customs were themselves administered by foreign officials. So it was just a really terrible set of blows to the dignity of the dynasty. And it pretty much signaled that the Qing state was no longer really a viable, workable government for China. The days of the dynasty were pretty clearly numbered. It lasted just about another decade. But during that decade, new alternative ideas about China's future became much more influential and much more significant. Revolutionary movements designed to overthrow the entire imperial heritage and establish